The rain had stopped just before dawn. It didn't fall hard, just enough to darken the concrete, to sharpen the smell of rust, wet fur, and disinfectant. A silence had settled over the kennels, broken only by the low whir of a ceiling fan and the distant, rhythmic click of someone unlocking a door. Somewhere a dog let out a soft huff, not quite a bark, more like a question. She arrived early. Always did. Marta didn't like being watched while she worked. People got sentimental about dogs at the wrong moments, right when she needed to be practical. The shelter didn't run on emotions, it ran on paperwork, checklists, and a quiet math that counted crates, vaccines, meals, and how much space remained. That math never favored the old ones, or the strange ones. She walked with purpose down the corridor, keys jangling against her thigh, clipboard tucked under one arm. There were 32 dogs left. One of them would be gone by 10 a.m. That was the schedule. No room for delay. The others stirred as she passed, tails thumping against crate walls, noses pressed to mesh, some hopeful, some resigned. She didn't stop until she reached the last cage on the left. There she did pause just a second longer than usual. Unit 3 to B. It wasn't a large dog. Shepherd mix, perhaps, though something in its frame was leaner than it should have been, like its ribs and limbs belonged to a different species entirely. Tan coat streaked with mud, a single torn ear, and one milky eye that didn't seem to follow movement anymore. The shelter intake had no name for it. They found limping along a service road outside Miller's Ferry 2 weeks ago. No chip, no collar, no history. It hadn't eaten in 6 days, and it hadn't made a sound, not once. She crouched down now, knees cracking, gently, and looked at it through the mesh. It looked back. Still, quiet, posture low but alert. The kind of gaze that didn't ask for help, didn't plead, just watched. Marta exhaled slowly. The clipboard felt heavier than it should have. 3 to B, she muttered, almost to herself. Today's the day. But even as she said it, something held her still. The dog tilted its head barely. Enough to notice, enough to unsettle. Behind her, the hallway stretched long and empty. No one else was in yet. No one to question a delay. No one to stop her from doing what she did next. She unlocked the cage. The dog didn't move. Marta waited. Still nothing. I need you to walk, she said softly, keeping her voice even. I'm not going to carry you. It rose slowly. Not the stiff, pained shuffle she expected from an injured stray, but something smoother. Not young, but not weak either. Each movement seemed deliberate, like it was remembering how to use the body it was in. The pads of its feet made no sound on the concrete. She let it down the hallway, her boots clicking softly. The shelter lights flickered once. Motion sensors. There was no wind inside, but she felt a shift in the air, a coolness brushing the back of her neck as they neared the steel door at the far end. The room beyond was quiet. No barking, no yelping. Just metal surfaces, white tiles, and the faint hum of electricity. Everything clean, everything final. She hesitated with her hand on the latch. The dog stopped beside her. Marta looked down. For the first time, it wasn't watching her. Its head was slightly turned, ear twitching toward the far wall where the drain ran beneath the tile. Then it did something she hadn't seen it do once in 14 days. It sat calmly, as if it had brought her there, not the other way around. Marta opened her mouth to speak, to ask, though she wasn't sure what, and then it happened. A sound, not loud, not growled or barked, but clear. A single word spoken in a cracked human-like rasp. Cold. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The word didn't echo. It just hung there flat, unreal, impossible, but real. As if spoken by lungs, not vocal cords. A word that should never have come from the body in front of her. The dog didn't look at her. It was staring at the wall again, at the drain. Something inside Marta shifted. Not panic, not fear, but a kind of ancient recognition. The sort that comes not from reason, but from the way skin tightens when something wrong enters a quiet room. Behind her, the fan creaked once and went still. And all at once the shelter was silent. The dog blinked once, then twice. Then it looked up at her again. Not pleading. Just waiting. The room suddenly felt colder than it should have, and Marta, without understanding why, closed the latch and stepped back. She would not mark 3 to B for anything today. She needed to know what that word meant. And what else it might say. Marta didn't return to the cage for 2 hours in that time. She didn't sit, she didn't call anyone. She didn't even write the report that was due by mid-morning. Instead, she stood by the sink in the supply room with her hands still damp from washing them, staring out at the pale blue dumpster behind the wire mesh window. The clouds hung low and fast-moving now, wind tugging at the corners of a soaked cardboard box by the loading dock. A gull circled once, then veered inland as if something here didn't interest it anymore. The word had been real. That was the part that held her. Not the word itself, not the coldness of it, but the clarity, the precision. That sound couldn't have been a mistake. It wasn't mimicry. It wasn't a bark warped by echo. It was speech. Yet the longer she stood there, the more her mind betrayed her. Had she heard what she wanted to hear, or what she feared? Shelter work was not gentle on the psyche. There were dreams you didn't admit. There were routines that dulled things you once felt deeply. She had told herself for years now that quietness was peace, and yet the dog had spoken. It had chosen that word. Cold. By the time she returned to 3-B, the kennels were louder. A group of new volunteers had arrived and were moving from run to run with leashes and soft voices, the way they were trained. The dogs barked in uneven waves, hope, panic, confusion, all of it ringing off the concrete walls. But the dog in 3-B was lying down again, not sleeping, watching. Marta crouched low. She didn't speak this time, didn't unlock the cage, just observed. There was something strange about the way it held its body, still and alert. Yes, but with the heaviness of something ancient beneath the skin. The dog didn't pant, didn't tremble. Even the twitch of its ear from before was gone, and that eye one good. One clouded held her gaze without shifting. A shiver moved up her arm. "You're not sick," she murmured finally. "But something's wrong." She didn't expect a response. There wasn't one. Just beyond the shelter walls, the wind had picked up again. Leaves scraped across the outer yard, dry and frantic. Somewhere a metal gate slammed shut. The dog flinched slightly, not from fear, but as if it had heard something else entirely in the sound. Marta rose slowly. She needed another opinion. Dr. Keller was still in his coat when she stepped into his office. He glanced up from his desk with the weary skepticism of someone who had heard too many "you need to see this" requests from underpaid staff and over-imaginative interns. "I want you to look at a dog," she said. "Define look." "Behavioral," she said. "Not medical, not yet." He sighed but followed her. In the hallway, their footsteps echoed longer than usual, and Marta noticed Keller's brow tighten as they neared the final runs. 3-B was still lying in the same position, only this time as they approached, it rose, not abruptly but like it had expected them. Keller stood still. Marta watched him shift his weight from one foot to the other. "What's your read?" she asked quietly. He tilted his head, observing. "Odd posture," he admitted. "Not anxious, not submissive, but it's not asserting anything either." "Look at its paws," Marta said. "Positioning's too even." The vet nodded slowly. "Dogs don't do symmetry. Not unless they're trained or—" He didn't finish the sentence. The dog hadn't blinked. Keller took one slow step forward, then another when he raised his hand, palm outward in the standard approach for nervous animals. The dog didn't back away. Instead, it lowered its head, not cowering, but listening. Then it stepped forward, once deliberate, light-footed. Its gaze didn't break. Keller crouched, and then the dog did something that made him freeze. It placed one paw gently, very gently, on the toe of his boot, just one, and held it there. Neither of them moved. Marta watched a tremor move through Keller's jaw. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. He exhaled slowly. "Where did this one come from?" "Miller's Ferry," she said, "near the old canal road. No tags, no chip." Keller didn't answer. He stood, then backed away. "We'll need to move it to where isolation. Somewhere no one wanders in." She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because if what you think happened this morning really did... we need time." "For what?" "To figure out if this is a miracle," he said, voice low, "or something else entirely." Just then, the power flickered. A low hum followed deep in the walls, like something mechanical turning over in sleep. And down the corridor, past the closed office doors, came the sound of a dog whining. Not this dog. Another sharp, sudden, and fearful, then silence. The wind outside had stopped. Inside the cage, 3-B turned its head slightly toward the direction of the whine. It's bodied as an actor, and for the first time since its arrival, it bared its teeth, not in warning, in grief. The air thickened. Something had shifted. Something had been remembered. Marta stood frozen, her hand still resting on the closed latch, as if afraid that any motion might shift the moment into something less explainable. The word cold had not repeated, but it didn't need to. The dog 3-B simply sat beside her, watching the far wall with a gaze that felt older than the building around them. Not confused, not aggressive, just waiting. She turned the key and stepped backward without meaning to. Her boot scraped against the tile. Still, the dog didn't move. Only when she took another breath did it finally glance up at her, not with pleading eyes, but with something more dangerous. Expectation. Outside, the wind had picked up. She hadn't noticed before, but now it pressed in soft waves against the narrow shelter windows, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves and distant traffic. The building had no reason to feel drafty, but the cold crept anyway down her sleeves, across the base of her neck, into the brittle edges of her breath. She stepped out of the room and closed the door behind her, the soft click of the latch louder than it should have been. Through the narrow window in the steel, the dog remained seated, facing the drain. She didn't mark him down. She didn't write anything. Instead, she left the clipboard on a folding chair and walked down the hallway in silence, boots landing, heavier than before. By the time she reached the reception area, the sky had turned a dull pewter. Morning had arrived in name only. No birds, no sun, just light, colorless and still. Paul was already there, leaned against the counter sipping the shelter's terrible coffee, the kind that tasted like burnt pennies. He raised an eyebrow as she approached. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said, not unkindly. She didn't respond right away. just stared at the dark shape of his reflection in the front window. Somewhere beyond that glass, cars moved through puddles and people checked their phones, and nothing had changed. "I need you to check something," she finally said. "The dog in 3 to B." Paul blinked. "That the one slated for this morning?" "It's not happening," he frowned. "Set the coffee down." "Okay, why?" She hesitated, words half-formed and unspeakable. Because it spoke wasn't going to be helpful. So instead, she said, "It's not like the others. Something's wrong. I don't know how to explain it." Paul studied her a moment longer, then gave a slow nod and pulled his badge from his vest. "All right. You want me to sedate and move it, or no?" Her voice was sharper than she meant, then softer. "Just go see it. Stay quiet. Watch how it moves, how it looks at you." He glanced at her again, a look somewhere between curiosity and concern. Then he disappeared down the hallway. She didn't follow. Instead, she stepped outside, just for air, just to breathe. The shelter yard was wet and empty, the chain-link fences, slick with rain. Patches of standing water reflected the gray above, broken by ripples of wind. She leaned against the outer wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her breath showed faintly in the air. It shouldn't have. Behind her, the building remained quiet, and then, after 2 full minutes, she heard the door open again. Paul stood in the threshold, his face pale, jaw slightly clenched. His hand was empty. "No clipboard, no leash," he said. "Something to you, didn't he?" Marta asked, not bothering to mask the question. Paul nodded once. "Same word. I didn't believe it until I heard it." And even then, he trailed off, looking past her to the parking lot beyond. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "We can't keep him here. If word gets out, it won't." She said, "I'm not telling anyone. Not yet. But we can't just pretend that didn't happen." "No, we can't." They both stood in silence, listening as the wind curled around the building's edge like a whisper through reeds. The trees beyond the fence swayed with slow intent, like something approaching from far off. Then Paul said, quieter, "There's a place I know. Not official but off-grid. Folks who take in what shelters won't. Old ranch near Route 10. Marta nodded. "He won't go in a crate. He won't have to." They didn't speak again as they walked back toward the side door. The concrete was colder now, and somewhere in the distance a power line crackled faintly, like a nerve twitching beneath skin. Inside, the hallway lights flickered once, then steadied, and at the far end, through the small square window in the steel door. 3 to B had risen to his feet, still watching the drain. Still waiting. Marta placed her hand on the latch again, slower this time. The air on the other side felt different now, not colder, just older. She turned the key. The door opened. The dog did not look at her, but he stepped forward as if, at last, something had begun. Marta didn't mark 3 to B, not that day. Not after what it said. The word still echoed inside her, not as a sound but as a present scold spoken, like a confession, or a memory, or maybe a warning. She couldn't tell anymore. The shelter was closed to the public that day. A training seminar in the city had cleared out the staff. Just her, the vet tech who was always late, and the janitor, who didn't speak much English. A hollow kind of quiet blanketed the building. She could hear the hum of the freezer from 3 rooms away. She hadn't slept. That morning she came in early again, coffee gone cold in the passenger seat, her hand shaking just enough that she left the keys in the ignition for 5 full minutes before realizing it. 32B was waiting, not at the back of the cage this time, but sitting right in the center, gaze level, unblinking. She opened the cage and said nothing. It stood on its own. They walked again past the kennels, past the intake room, past the place she'd never brought a dog before. Storage, concrete floor, no tiles, the kind of room you forget exists until something forces you to remember. The air was different there, not damp, but still, weighty, as if something below the surface was pressing upward. She didn't understand what she was doing, only that she was doing it, that something in her legs carried her, that her hands moved without instruction, not fear, but not choice either. The dog stopped in the middle of the room, and once again, it sat. Marta watched it, waited. No word came this time. Just a slow turn of its head toward the drain near the far wall. Same place, same gesture. The room was too quiet, no echo, no distant barking from the kennels. The silence wasn't natural, it felt kept. She took a few steps forward. The floor groaned, and not a creak of boards, but a dull resonance, like something hollow beneath the concrete. She knelt beside the drain, the metal cool against her palm. It wasn't rusted. In fact, it looked newer than the rest of the room. Behind her, the dog didn't move. She tried to lift the grate. It didn't budge, bolted. She traced the edges, found a smear of something that might have been dirt, but there was a faint odor beneath it. Not foul, just old, like rainwater that had nowhere left to go. Then she heard it, a sound beneath the floor, a soft shuffling, not mechanical, organic, measured, as if something down there was pacing. She shot upright. Her breath clouded slightly in the air. The temperature had dropped. She looked at the dog, still seated, still silent, but the tension in its frame had changed. Muscles taut, ears angled backward, the posture of a creature waiting but not for her. She took one step back. The sound below stopped. A moment passed. Then 2. Then the dog spoke again, but not a word this time, just a sound low, guttural, a hum that hovered just above a growl. It wasn't a threat, it was something else. Recognition. And suddenly she felt it, that this thing, whatever it was, it didn't begin 2 weeks ago on the service road, or at the shelter, or even in this room. It began elsewhere. Long ago. She backed toward the door slowly. The dog rose and followed. Not close, just enough. Outside the wind had picked up. Dust swirled low across the concrete walk, dragging old leaves and forgotten scraps of paper toward the fence line. A crow called once, then again, more urgently, and flapped away toward the pines. Marta shut the storage door behind her and locked it. She didn't speak, not to herself, not to the dog. But as they walked back down the hall, a question took shape, one she hadn't dared consider. Had the dog come to her? Or had something else sent it? Back in the kennel, 3-2 walked into the cage without command. It turned once, lay down, and rested its chin on its paws, not weary, not defiant, just still. Locked the gate. Her hand lingered on the latch. And then she heard it again. That same soft shuffling, no longer beneath the floor. This time, behind the far door at the end of the hall. The one that hadn't been opened in over a year. The door to the incinerator room. The wind outside went still. Marta turned toward the sound, her throat dry, her heart suddenly quiet. The handle of the door did not turn, but it was no longer fully closed. The incinerator room door stood slightly ajar, the kind of gap that doesn't happen by accident. Marta stared at it, the way one might stare at an open grave and still wonder who it was dug for. Behind her, 3-2 stood at the edge of its kennel, watching, but not moving. Its ears were forward now. Listening, she stepped toward the door, slow and deliberate, each footfall muffled by the concrete beneath her. The metal handle felt untouched, clean, unworn, colder than it should have been. When she pushed it open, the hinges didn't creak. No protest, no sound, just the soft release of stale air, like something exhaled after holding its breath far too long. The room hadn't changed. Steel bins, cement walls, a drain that no longer drained, and the furnace cold dark, unused since the funding cuts shuttered it the previous winter. The walls still bore the black bloom of years past, but the center of the room held something new, a single paw print, perfect, clean, pressed into a layer of fine gray dust. Much too recent. Marta didn't move closer. She only stood there, staring at it, not because she didn't want to approach, but because somehow she knew that she shouldn't. The silence in the room deepened, not heavy, hollow. She turned and closed the door. This time, it latched back in the corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed once overhead, then flickered out, leaving only the pale blue wash of daylight spilling from the end of the hall. The dog was no longer in the kennel. She didn't panic. Somehow, she already knew where it had gone. Outside, the wind had calmed. The morning had settled into stillness, the kind that comes after a long rain, when every leaf feels newly pinned to its branch and the earth holds its breath. She found 3-2 standing at the edge of the back field, where the grass gave way to tall pines and the fence grew thin with rust. The dog didn't look back, just stood there, nose tilted slightly toward the trees. Marta didn't call to it instead. She walked out barefoot, feeling the grit of the gravel beneath her feet, the warmth of the sun just beginning to rise behind her shoulders. She stopped, a few feet away. "You're not lost," she said, not loudly. "You were never lost." The dog turned its head, just enough to catch her in profile. That same torn ear, that same quiet gaze. But the clouded eye had cleared. Not bright, but seeing. It stepped forward, through the tall grass, past the last post of the fence, where a panel had fallen years ago and no one had bothered to fix it. No leash, no collar, no name. That it walked into the woods the way a memory disappears, not suddenly but in pieces. The tail last, brushing a fern. The undergrowth swallowed the sound of its paws. She didn't follow. Instead, she sat on the edge of the old concrete pad near the lot, where they used to unload pallets of food before the second budget cut. She sat there for a long time, letting the breeze pass over her arms, letting the silence settle. Somewhere deep in the pines, a bird called once, then went quiet, and behind that, faint but clear, a voice not human, not dog, but something between spoke a word she would never write down, a word she would never try to explain, a word meant only for her. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, Marta didn't feel the weight of the clipboard in her lap. She felt the ground, the wind, the final breath of something old, finally released. Later, when the others arrived and asked about 3-2, she told them only this, that one went home. She never saw it again. But some mornings just before dawn, she'd find paw prints in the gravel outside the gate, never more than 1 or 2, as if it had stopped there, watching. Not waiting, just remembering. And once, on a Tuesday in late autumn, she found the incinerator door unlatched again. Inside, nothing except the print in the dust. Fresher than before.